Okay, now today we want to take a look at the skepticism of the Hellenistic period. And keep in mind that this is the third philosophical movement of the period that we've been talking about, the Epicureans and the Stoics being the other two, and anticipate with this as well that it's going to recur and have a very important role during the Renaissance. In fact, in the vacuum, epistemological vacuum, created by the Protestant Reformation and the rise of modern science together, that is to say, the loss of church authority in matters other than religious matters, in that epistemological vacuum, Sextus Empiricus and the skepticism of the Hellenists loomed very, very large. So that in the Renaissance, the philosophical starting point, the challenge was always how to overcome skepticism, how to avoid being a skeptic, you see. You may remember that from your awareness of Descartes. The point is that Sextus Empiricus' outlines of Pyrrhonism, which was and is one of our main sources for knowledge of this period of skepticism, Sextus Empiricus' work first was printed in 1560 in France. And of course, 1560 is right in the middle of that period during Reformation, when things begin to be up for grabs. And so anticipate hearing more about skepticism when we get to people like Pascal and Descartes and the major French philosophical skeptic of the time, a man by the name of Montaigne, so forth. So that in order to underscore the historical importance of the movement we are focusing on today. If the Epicureans had an earlier kickstart with the Cyrenaics, and if the Stoics had an earlier beginning because of the Cynics, I suspect it's true to say that skepticism had its roots in a combination of cynical attitudes towards the authority of institutions and traditions, but also in the relativism and skepticism of some of the sophists. In other words, skepticism was not brand new. In fact, historically, skepticism seems to emerge at those historical junctures where some systematic approach or method in philosophy is coming apart. You see. So you get skepticism at the end of the classic Greek period, you get skepticism at the end of the medieval period, you get skepticism at the conclusion of the Enlightenment, that sort of thing. Now, we usually trace the development of Hellenistic skepticism, however, back to a Greek by the name of Pyrrho, a native of Elis, Pyrrho of Elis, who posed three questions. One, what is the nature of things? Which was, of course, the question with which Greek philosophy began. What's the basic nature of everything? The basic stuff. What's the nature of things? And to that, his answer was that it's unknown. And it's unknown by virtue of the inadequacy of all purported human knowledge. The senses, as Plato and others before and after have said, yield nothing but changeable opinion. And reasoning, as nowadays the political correctness movement tells us, is always loaded with subjective prejudice. And equipolant positions, equipolant means things of equal weight. So equipolant arguments are such that the case for a position is of no more weight than the case against it. Or the case for position A is cancelled out with the case for position B, equal weight, equal arguments. And since that seems to be the way it is with all human knowledge, Pyrrho's conclusion is that we simply don't know the nature of things. His second question follows from that skepticism about the first. What then should be our attitude to things? Our attitude to reality? And his answer, suspend judgment. After all, why do you have to make your mind up? Withhold judgment. And the Greek term epoche was the term used for that suspense of judgment. You'll find that it's a term that continues to be used even in the 20th century in the phenomenological movement, 20th century methodological development in Europe, that underlies the all work in hermeneutical theory of people like Gadamer and so forth. But in any case, the roots of this modern phenomenological movement is the work of a man named Edmund Husserl, and he talked of epoche, suspending judgment about the nature of reality in order to probe to other foundations. It's the skeptical term, suspended judgment. Pyrrho's point was that it's better to withhold judgment than to prejudge, to dogmatize without grounds, to search and not to know is better than premature dogmatism. Well, his third question then is, what's the value of that attitude to reality? What's the value of suspending judgment? Which really amounts to the question, what's the value of being a skeptic? And the value of it, as far as he is concerned, the value of skepticism, if you like, is a kind of quietude. At least that's the word that's often used in the translation. I think the better idiom would be simply peace of mind. The less you know, the less you have to worry about. Peace of mind. If ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. Okay, we have our proverbs for saying it. The interesting thing is that in talking of this peace of mind, this quietude, the skeptics quite freely use rough synonyms like apatheia and ataraxia. And of course, apatheia was the Stoic attitude of freedom from passion, difference. Ataraxia, the Epicurean value of freedom from pain in the body and trouble in the soul, which is another way of saying peace of mind, as well as peace of body. So, in the end, it turns out that all three of these Hellenistic movements are after, in terms of the value they find in their position, they're after something very similar. In the troubled fragmentation of the traditions, you see, in a Hellenistic age, which had produced a veneer of unity to the culture. In that, what attitude is going to help? Well, don't worry. You see, peace of mind. And that in common across the scene. Now, if you look at the anthology at Kaufmann on page 491, let me just note what Sextus offers by way of definition of skepticism. And you'll see how seriously this sort of thing is taken. At the bottom of 491, second column, chapter 4, what skepticism is. Skepticism is an ability, a mental attitude. It's not a theoretical position. It's rather an attitude to knowing it all. It's an attitude which opposes appearances to judgments in any way whatsoever. Now, here's the judgment you've made, but look at the way things appear to us. Confidence. With the result that owing to the equipollence of objects and reasons thus opposed, we are brought first to a state of mental suspense, suspend judgment, next to a state of unperturbedness or quietude. We call it an ability, not in a subtle sense, but simply in respect of being able to have an undisturbed mind. Yes. So it's an attitude. Now, if you're tempted to say, but the skeptic seems to contradict himself. The skeptic knows that he doesn't know. You see, that sort of self-referentiality argument has become one of the standard objections to some forms of skepticism. No, the Pyrrhonic skeptic, Pyrrho, would not say that he knows he doesn't know. We don't know whether we know or we don't know. That's where the ambiguity is. We just don't know. And we don't know that we don't know. We're just not sure even of that. You see. Now, in that way, they made a distinction between skepticism and dogmatism. You can be dogmatic about not knowing. You see. But it also distinguished them from another position that Sextus talks about, that of the academics, and usually referred to as academic skepticism. Now, academic skepticism had nothing to do with universities, because there weren't any such. The academy, of course, was the name of Plato's school that he had established in Athens. And what happened to the academy after his death? Initially, it fell into the leadership of a man named Speusimus, who was a Neo-Pythagorean. But that Neo-Pythagoreanism didn't sustain itself for any great length of time, and so some in that academy tradition became skeptical. And in a sense, that's not altogether alien to the spirit of Socrates, who on many occasions would say in the dialogues, I don't know. Remember? You see? So there is this academic skepticism, and it's the name of Carneades that's associated with this. Now, Carneades is equally clear that there is no indubitable knowledge. Sense perception is relative. Sure, Plato had told us that. Reasoning processes have to have first premises, as Aristotle had pointed out. And the danger is that if we're trying to find the first premise, we might go all the way in some infinite regress of premises, or else end up in a circular argument, a problem that Aristotle had indicated. So reasoning processes, inference, does not give us firm knowledge, unless we've got firm knowledge of first premises. The Stoics talk of intuition, of irresistible concepts, to which the skeptics replied in effect, sorry, we don't find them irresistible. After all, if somebody says, well, it's obvious to me, the simplest refutation is to say, I'm sorry, it isn't to me. So what? It may be more a commentary on you than what it is that you think is obvious. And as far as the dialectic is concerned, Plato's analysis of alternative hypotheses as to the essence of things, well, the dialectic may simply reveal the equipollence of alternative positions, rather than settling the thing. So Carneades agreed, knowledge isn't possible. But there's enough of the Platonic academy in Carneades to be able to say knowledge isn't possible, but opinion is. Belief is. And in talking about opinion and belief, Carneades introduces the notion of probability. Probability. Now, it's not any modern mathematical concept of probability that he has in mind, obviously. It's probability more in the popular common sense of the term. When somebody asks if you're going to shop at Stratford Centre tomorrow, and you say, well, probably not, doesn't mean to say you've done any calculation of chances, or statistical survey of all the past Saturdays to see what the predictability is for tomorrow. You see, nothing of the sort's involved. You're simply saying, well, I don't know for sure, but I don't expect that's the case. You see, probability. Probabilism admits the fallibility of the opinion that's expressed. And so what you have in Carneades is a recognition and acceptance of beliefs and opinions, but in a fallibilist sense. in a fallibilist sense. So that a Carneades would make an assertion, yes, recognizing that it may be false. Whereas the kind of knowledge, of course, which Plato and Aristotle are after and the skeptics are criticizing, is the kind of knowledge which is, it's claimed, not even possibly false. You see, knowledge with certainty, belief with probability, and the recognition that it could be wrong. There's a note of fallibilism in Oliver Cromwell's famous statement to some dogmatist around him. I beseech you, sir, by the bowels of Christ, consider that you may be wrong. You see. And what Oliver Cromwell was doing was, I take it, simply recognizing the fallibility of human judgment, and insisting that that's a proper human attitude, to recognize the fallibility of human judgment. So while Carneades is spoken of as a skeptic, in antiquity was treated as a skeptic, is argued against by St. Augustine as a skeptic. You see. By, I suspect, later, more modern standards, Carneades isn't so much a skeptic as one who's willing to speak of knowledge as we do today as a kind of justified belief. You see. Belief that is justified, but not indubitably certain. Could be wrong. So, well, this is the kind of picture that you get. The Roman skeptics themselves, like Sextus Empiricus and some others of his general period, tended to classify the arguments for skepticism into various types of arguments that are called modes of argument or tropes. Trope being a form, a category of argument. And on page 494, you have some material which outlines 5 kinds of arguments. 5 actually that go back to a man named Agrippa. Others of them have made 10 classifications. Agrippa boils it down to 5. The 5 kinds of arguments are very simple. 1, an argument from conflicting views. Well, that's the equipollence. The second, an argument from infinite regress of premises. That's familiar too. Third, an argument from the relativity of appearances. That's classic too. Fourth is an argument from the over-dogmatism that people have about their opinions and hypotheses. That's classic too. And fifth, the argument that points out the circularity in a case that's being made, begging the question. So those 5 forms of argument for skepticism, none of them are new. You see, we've come across all of those criticisms at one point or another. And the sum total impact for the skeptic is to undermine the possibility of indubitable knowledge altogether. Not only knowledge of forms and unchanging realities, knowledge of causes as well, all 4 kinds of causes. Knowledge of mathematical truths and relationships. Knowledge of the laws of logic, even. You see. You take Aristotle's famous negative proof for the law of non-contradiction. He calls it a negative proof because he can't prove it positively. The negative proof is simply to challenge anybody to deny the law of non-contradiction without assuming it. You see. They can't do it. You have to assume it in order to make any statement. Well, that's not proving the law of non-contradiction, it's simply proving the negation is false. So you get all of these criticisms and the skeptical tradition arising from it. Not only are there these stock criticisms of knowledge, argument for skepticism, there are all sorts of stock arguments that developed against skepticism. And we'll see some more of this when we get to St. Augustine. One of his first philosophical writings was a book called Against the Academicians. Now, keep in mind, Academy. When you read Against the Academicians, don't think he's against all college teachers and such like. He's against the academic skeptics, you see. And what he does is to try and argue, for instance, that even the most complete skeptic must know that he exists in order to think he may be wrong about something. Even if you accept fallibilism and say you may be wrong, well, in order to be wrong, you have to exist. And the way Augustine puts it is in the little Latin phrase, si fallor, if I'm wrong, sum, I exist. What does that remind you of? Descartes, cogito ergo sum. First version of it was dubito ergo sum. I doubt, therefore I exist. Where did Descartes get it? Stole it from Augustine.